Dolly Parton, one of the most radiant and unforgettable figures ever to step onto the American stage. A woman who rose from poverty to global stardom, turning her voice into a legacy that time itself cannot erase. From a small cabin in the mountains of Tennessee, she grew into one of the most beloved icons in music history. With her signature blonde hair, an ever-present smile, and a voice that could reach the deepest corners of the human heart. For more than half a century, Dolly Parton has not simply defined success, she has redefined what it means to remain human within it. From Jolene to I Will Always Love You, from the stage of the Grand Ole Opry to humanitarian work that has changed millions of lives, she has stood before the world with a brightness that feels almost unshakable, as if nothing could ever dim it. But behind that image lies a story few are willing to truly face. Not the lights, not the applause, but the quiet weight of loss, of loneliness, of sacrifices that fame could never repay. The world sees a legend who never stops smiling, yet so few understand the cost of always being strong, of always being the light for others, even in moments when your own world feels dim. Before we begin, if her voice has ever brought you comfort, if her story has ever touched something quiet within you, may you take a moment, not just to watch, but to hold a thought, a prayer, or a silent gratitude for a life that has given so much and asked for so little in return. Because behind every smile, there is always more than the world is ready to see. There are souls who enter this world already carrying wounds too deep for childhood innocence to ever fully mend. And Dolly Parton was one of them. Long before doctors' words or headlines of concern would surround her name, she had already mastered a quiet, instinctive form of survival. Not in hospitals or classrooms, but in the remote valleys of the Great Smoky Mountains, where she was born on January 19, 1946, in Sevier County, Tennessee. Her first lullaby was not sung. It was the wind threading through pine trees, the hush of wilderness pressing against a one-room cabin with no electricity, no running water, only silence and endurance. Her family was so poor that her father paid the doctor who delivered her with a sack of cornmeal, and on that freezing night, the cold seemed alive, creeping through thin wooden walls while the stars shone beautifully but distantly, as if even heaven kept its distance. Inside, her mother, Avi Lee, lay beneath worn blankets, her strength stretched thin between exhaustion and faith, offering warmth not through fire, but through hope. Poverty was not a condition for the Parton family. It was a constant presence, something worn like a second skin. Winters were relentless, biting through fabric and flesh alike, until even breath turned visible in the dark. 12 children shared what little they had, clinging to one another for warmth, learning early that survival meant togetherness. Summers brought no relief. Bare feet cut by stones, cold river baths, the scent of smoke and damp wood clinging to everything. Yet those harsh seasons became her earliest teachers, shaping a resilience that lived not just in her mind, but in her body. Her father, Robert Lee Parton, could neither read nor write, but his calloused hands told stories of sacrifice, rising before dawn, working endlessly so his children would not go hungry. Her mother moved with quiet grace, sewing, cooking, singing hymns that stitched light into darkness. By the age of 6, Dolly had already stepped into responsibility, carrying water, caring for siblings, stirring meals over a wood stove until smoke burned her eyes. Love, she learned, was labor. Faith was patience. Then, at 9 years old, loss arrived with a silence heavier than snow. Her baby brother Larry lived only 4 days. There was no ceremony, no marker, just a small patch of earth and a grief too large for words. That silence never left her. It followed her into adulthood, into her music, where some songs became conversations with a brother she never truly knew. School offered little comfort. When her mother lovingly stitched her a coat from scraps of fabric, it became a source of ridicule among classmates. But to Dolly, It was something sacred, a reflection of her mother's love, thread by thread. She carried that pain home through the snow, tears warm against the cold, and years later transformed it into a song that turned shame into dignity. Music became her refuge early. Before she could even spell, she was writing songs, reshaping hunger into melody, loneliness into lullabies, pain into something she could hold without breaking. She did not sing for fame. She sang to survive. Every winter, every mile walked, every stitched piece of cloth became part of the instrument she carried within her. A voice capable of turning silence into something beautiful. Long before the spotlight, before the rhinestones and applause, that voice was her shield. Forged in hardship, refined by loss, it belonged to a barefoot girl singing into the Tennessee wind, unaware that one day the world would finally listen. Their car was worn down, the gas tank barely half full, yet their dreams carried a weight that seemed to bend the air around them. The suitcases they brought held more songs than clothes. Wax paper sandwiches, rain-stained notebooks, and a quiet belief that refused to fade. They slept wherever the night allowed. Borrowed couches, church pews, sometimes the back seat of an aging Chevy parked beneath the vast Tennessee sky. Years later, Dolly Parton would describe that chapter as a strange collision of wonder, hunger, and heartbreak. Nights where the stars felt close enough to touch, and mornings where frost clung to the windows while only a melody could keep them warm. It was a childhood rich in imagination but starved of everything else. When she graduated in the spring of 1964, there were no celebrations waiting, no applause, no flowers, only silence, and a decision that would change everything. While others posed for photographs, she stood alone at dawn on a quiet dirt road, a cardboard suitcase in one hand, a bus ticket in the other, and $20 tucked away like a fragile promise. She told herself she would make it, or she would never return. As the Greyhound bus carried her away, the mountains that raised her faded into the distance, shrinking into shadows that would follow her for the rest of her life. Nashville did not welcome her with open arms. It greeted her with illusion. Neon lights shimmered from afar but felt cold up close. Doors stayed closed. Voices questioned her accent, her sound, her very identity. In a small rented room, she would sit by the window at night, watching rain slide across empty streets, listening to engines she could not afford to follow. The silence there felt heavier than any mountain winter. Some nights, she sang simply to remind herself she still existed. In 1965, opportunity arrived, but not without compromise. Monument Records offered her a contract, yet they asked her to soften everything that made her real. Her voice was too country, too strong, too rooted. They wanted something lighter, sweeter, easier to sell. She sang what they gave her, perfectly. But inside, she felt like a stranger wearing someone else's skin. When the records failed, the calls stopped. The industry moved on. But she didn't. By day, she performed in smoky bars where few truly listened. By night, she wrote by candlelight, on envelopes, receipts, scraps of anything she could find. Her hands ached, her body weakened, but something inside her refused to break. She once said she hummed just to hear something alive. And in that quiet persistence, her true voice began to form. Then came 1966. A small song, Put It Off Until Tomorrow, climbed to #1, and suddenly the question echoed across Music Row. Who is Dolly Parton? The answer arrived a year later with, "Hello, I'm Dolly." It wasn't just an introduction. It was a declaration. These were not borrowed emotions. They were truths carved from struggle, loss, faith, and defiance. Many still underestimated her. Some saw charm. Others saw novelty. But beneath that bright smile was an unyielding will. The barefoot girl from the mountains, the one who once sang just to survive, was still there, stronger than ever. And when she finally wrote her farewell-in song, it was not an ending, but a liberation. I Will Always Love You became more than music. It became release, grace, and healing wrapped into a single voice. From that moment on, no one could confine her again. Not to silence, not to expectation, not to anything less than her truth. The climb of Dolly Parton to the top of country music was never a smooth ascent. It was a quiet war for survival, fought not on battlefields, but beneath blinding stage lights. By the early 1970s, she had carved out a place on the Porter Wagoner show, her golden voice reaching millions of homes each week. On screen, she radiated warmth. Bright, effortless, almost flawless. But behind that glow, something was beginning to fracture. With every song she wrote, the truth cut deeper. Her lyrics were too honest, too raw for an industry that preferred its women soft and agreeable. She later admitted she felt like she was standing in someone else's shadow, not with bitterness, but with exhaustion. Porter, Wagoner, both mentor and gatekeeper, could not see that the artist he helped shape had already outgrown the boundaries around her. She respected him, even loved him, but love could not breathe in confinement. By 1974, the decision she feared most became inevitable. She would leave. Not out of rebellion, but necessity. Survival. Her farewell was not spoken. It was sung. I Will Always Love You emerged like a prayer, tender and aching, a goodbye wrapped in grace rather than anger. She would later confess she cried all the way to the top of the charts. Because success born from loss does not feel like victory. It feels like grief wearing a crown. Behind the curtain, there were no cameras. Only a woman standing alone, whispering to herself that she had done the right thing. Even before that moment, she had already revealed her depth. Jolene, released a year earlier, cut through noise like a whisper in thunder. Fragile, pleading, unforgettable. It was more than a hit. It was a mirror reflecting vulnerability few dared to show. Yet Nashville still tried to contain her, labeling her as novelty, sweetness, something easier to understand than the storm building beneath her smile. Her days were consumed by filming and performing. Her nights belonged to solitude, writing in dim rooms thick with fatigue, ink blurred from sweat and tears, coffee gone cold beside her trembling hands. She once said writing was how she fought her way through darkness, each melody a breath she refused to lose. There were nights she fell asleep, sitting upright, guitar pressed against her body, its strings leaving marks like quiet proof that she had endured one more day. The mid-1970s pushed her to the edge. Endless tours, interviews, recordings that stretched until dawn. Her once clear voice grew strained, her body worn by exhaustion hidden beneath glitter and costume. She learned to disguise pain as brilliance, to turn fatigue into performance. Some nights, she would collapse in her dressing room, only to rise again with a smile, joking that she must have shined too brightly. But when the lights faded, her body trembled with the cost. Still, she refused to surrender her truth. When told to rest, she wrote. When told to compromise, she resisted harder. By 1977, the storm began to shift. Here You Come Again broke through barriers, reaching both country and pop audiences. Critics accused her of abandoning her roots, but she answered simply. She had not left country music, she had carried it with her. That belief became her anchor. In 1980, 9 to 5 Inches rose from Another Sleepless Night. A song that was more than music. It was a battle cry hidden in melody. It spoke for those worn down by routine, by pressure, by survival itself. The world celebrated, yet behind the applause, she was running on exhaustion. Long shoots, constant travel, endless demands. There were nights she looked into the mirror and no longer recognized the woman staring back. But even then, she kept singing. Because for her, music was not just art. It was medicine, the only thing that kept her standing. As trends shifted in the 1980s, she did not chase them. She remained rooted in herself, choosing authenticity over acceptance. By the end of that era, she had not only reached the summit, she had reshaped it. Her voice became one of America's most enduring sounds, her songwriting a living archive of pain, resilience, and grace. And through every triumph and every scar, the barefoot girl from the Smoky Mountains never disappeared. She lived on in every note. Proof that even the deepest pain, when carried with truth, can be transformed into something almost sacred. There are lives shaped not by what is seen, but by what is quietly endured. And the story of Dolly Parton is one of those rare journeys where loss becomes the hidden architecture of greatness. At the center of her life lies a silence that began in childhood, when her baby brother Larry lived for only 4 days before slipping away without ceremony, without a grave that the world would remember. She was too young to understand death, yet old enough to feel its weight settle into her spirit. In that small mountain home, grief was never spoken aloud. It lived in her mother's eyes, in her father's relentless labor, and in the quiet awareness of a child who learned that love could vanish without warning. As the years passed and her name rose to extraordinary heights, that early wound did not disappear. It transformed. It became the subtle tremor beneath her voice, the emotional truth that made strangers feel something they could not explain. When she sang songs of love and goodbye, the tenderness reached deeper than any stage or spotlight. It came from a place rooted in memory, in absence, in a bond that never had time to fully exist. She would later admit, almost in a whisper, that perhaps every song she had ever sung was, in some way, for those she had lost. This quiet grief became the foundation of her artistry. It gave her music an authenticity that could not be manufactured, a warmth that felt like home to millions. Her greatest achievement was never the applause or the awards, but the rare ability to transform pain into grace. Each lyric became a kind of restoration, a way of returning something to the world that life had once taken from her. She understood, from a young age, that love and loss are inseparable threads, one breaking, the other repairing, and that beauty often emerges from that fragile balance. At the heart of her emotional world stood her mother, Avi, a woman whose quiet strength shaped everything Dolly would become. She turned scarcity into dignity, hardship into resilience, and through her, Dolly learned that gentleness could be its own form of power. But when her mother passed, something inside her dimmed in a way no audience could ever see. The smile remained, the laughter continued, but beneath it all was a silence she could not escape. She once described it as if the sun had set within her, a darkness that did not erase her light, but softened it. Even the symbols of her childhood changed meaning. The coat of many colors, once a story of pride and survival, became something far more personal. A living memory of her mother's hands, her voice, her love. Singing it became an act of vulnerability, almost a reopening of a wound that time had not fully healed. And yet, through that pain, she found a kind of reconciliation. Not by forgetting, but by carrying those memories forward in a different way. Her journey was also marked by profound connections that shaped her creatively, none more quietly significant than her bond with her brother Floyd. Together, they shared a musical language that required no explanation, finishing each other's thoughts through melody and rhythm. When he passed away, that harmony was broken in a way that could not be repaired. It was not a loss that demanded headlines, but one that left a deep and private silence, like a song that could no longer be completed. And then came a different kind of heartbreak, the loss of her young niece, a tragedy marked by struggle and quiet despair. It was a reminder that even a life devoted to healing others through music could not protect those closest to her from pain. She gave everything she could: support, hope, even personal sacrifice. But some battles could not be won. This loss did not arrive with spectacle. It unfolded in silence, leaving behind questions that had no answers and a grief that could not be softened by time. Through all of this, Dolly carried forward a truth that few ever fully understand: that love is not defined by the ability to save, but by the willingness to remain, to stay present even when the outcome cannot be changed, to continue loving even when the song ends too soon. Her life became a testament to that quiet kind of courage, the strength to endure, to feel deeply, and to transform even the most unbearable losses into something meaningful. There are dreams so tender, so deeply woven into the human heart, that when life takes them away, it does more than wound. It reshapes the meaning of who we become. For Dolly Parton, that dream was motherhood, a quiet lullaby she carried within her but never had the chance to fully sing. When she married Carl Dean in 1966, her vision was never about fame or flashing lights. She imagined something softer, a home filled with warmth, the scent of baking drifting through the air, tiny shoes by the door, and a child's voice calling her Mama. That image lived within her for years, hidden between tour dates and melodies, a private hope she protected with silence. But in 1982, at just 36, that dream was taken from her. A long, invisible battle with endometriosis led to surgery that ended her ability to have children. When the hospital lights dimmed and the world outside kept moving, she was left in a stillness no applause could ever fill. It wasn't just the loss of a possibility. It was the quiet collapse of a future she had built in her heart since childhood. She walked away not only with physical scars, but with a silence that followed her into every room, echoing with lullabies she would never sing. In that silence, everything changed. The life she once imagined was replaced by absence. No laughter down the hall, no small arms wrapped around her, no whispered goodnights. For a woman who had always turned pain into music, this became the one song she could not finish. And yet, she refused to let that loss define her. Instead, she gathered the broken pieces of that unspoken love and offered them outward. To her family, to children she would never meet, and to the world through her imagination library, giving books, hope, and belonging to millions. Still, the ache never fully disappeared. It returned in quiet, ordinary moments. A child's laughter in the distance, a lullaby drifting through the air, a glimpse of a life that might have been. She rarely spoke of it, and when she did, it was without bitterness, only a gentle acceptance that some dreams are meant to grow in unexpected ways. The love she once imagined for one child expanded into something far greater, reaching beyond anything she had once dreamed. Behind her radiant public image, another struggle unfolded. Years of relentless work, sleepless nights, and constant demands began to take their toll. What began as exhaustion became something far more serious. Her body, once her greatest instrument, turned into a place of pain. The diagnosis was not just physical, it felt like betrayal. Yet she continued to stand beneath the lights, smiling, performing, giving everything she had while hiding what no one could see. Eventually, even her strength reached its limit. The surgery that saved her life also forced her into a quiet, emotional collapse. The joy she once found in music faded, replaced by a numb emptiness she struggled to understand. She withdrew from the world, her light dimmed, her spirit heavy, until one night, in complete silence, she found herself on the edge of something darker. And then, something small brought her back. Her dog, Popeye, appearing with nothing but presence and unconditional love. In that simple moment, she realized she still wanted to stay, still wanted to live. The road back was slow and uncertain. She turned to faith, to reflection, and eventually to music again. Not for success, but for survival. The songs that followed carried a deeper truth, shaped by struggle and quiet resilience. Looking back, she would call it one of the most humbling chapters of her life, one that stripped away illusion and revealed something more honest beneath. Because in the end, her story is not about a life untouched by pain, but about a life that chose to rise through it. She learned that strength is not the absence of suffering, but the courage to continue despite it, to keep singing even when the melody feels broken. And in doing so, she became more than a legend. She became a voice for anyone who has ever felt lost in silence, proving that even in the darkest moments, something within us can still choose to endure. For Dolly Parton, that anchor for decades was one man, Carl Dean, the only place she could truly come home to. The world saw her as an icon. Glittering gowns, roaring crowds, a voice that traveled across continents. But to him, she was simply the woman in a faded house robe, humming softly in the kitchen at dawn, her laughter echoing through quiet halls. He never called her a legend. He called her my girl. In a life built on performance, he was her silence, her truth. While cameras flashed and audiences cheered, he remained in the background, content to let the world take what it needed while he protected what mattered most. For nearly 60 years, he was her shelter in every storm, her refuge when the noise of fame became too loud. And then, in 2025, that refuge disappeared. At 82, Carl passed away peacefully in their Nashville home, the same home where they had shared quiet mornings and whispered prayers before sleep. There were no headlines loud enough to capture what followed, only the unbearable stillness of a space that had lost its heartbeat. That silence was not dramatic. It was devastating in its quietness. Friends would later say she didn't just lose her husband. She lost the only version of herself that existed before the world turned her name into something larger than life. In the days that followed, she withdrew behind closed curtains. Calls went unanswered. Meals sat untouched. Even music, the force that had carried her through every other loss, felt distant. She would pick up her guitar, strum a chord, and feel it vanish before it could become sound. It was as if the songs themselves had left with him. When it came time to say goodbye, she chose not spectacle, but intimacy. She arranged his farewell like a love letter, filling a small cedar chapel with wildflowers he once picked for her. Photographs lined the space. Moments never shared with the public. Muddy smiles, quiet Christmas mornings, bare feet on the porch swing. When she stood to speak, she did not turn to the mourners. Her gaze remained fixed on him, as if love alone might call him back for one more moment. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of a lifetime held inside. She thanked him not for the grand years, but for the smallest things. For loving her when she was not Dolly Parton, for protecting her from a world that often only saw the surface. Then she unfolded an old letter he had written long ago. "You were always my star," it read, "not for the world to see, but for her alone." And in that moment, the room fell into a sacred stillness. Guided by something deeper than memory, she picked up the guitar he had once given her and began to play. The melody was fragile, trembling under the weight of grief. It was a song no one had ever heard, a song written only for him. By the final note, her voice broke, and tears filled the room. Not because they were witnessing a legend, but because they were seeing a woman. Human, grieving, yet still standing. In the weeks that followed, loneliness settled into her life like a quiet shadow. Each morning, she placed 2 cups on the table before remembering there was now only one. Each night, she whispered goodnight into the dark, not out of habit, but because love does not end with absence. It lingers. In the air, in memory, in the spaces between heartbeats. Carl's passing was not just the loss of a partner. It was the quiet collapse of the one place she had ever belonged without effort. And now, in the stillness of the home they built together, she continues to walk those halls, carrying both love and longing. Even as her body grows more fragile and her voice softer, something within her remains unchanged. The devotion that never fades. Now, Dolly Parton, this chapter feels less like an ending and more like a lingering final verse, one that carries more weight than any chorus that came before. She has often said she does not fear death. What unsettles her is the thought of leaving something unfinished, and perhaps that is the essence of her life's work. Not perfection, not applause, but the courage to keep creating meaning until the very last note. Though time has begun to gently press upon her body, her spirit still moves with the same quiet determination that once carried her from a one-room cabin to the world's brightest stages. At 79, her name is no longer just remembered, it is woven into the fabric of music history. Yet inside her Brentwood home, where she spent nearly 6 decades with Carl Dean, the most powerful presence is no longer her voice, but the absence of his. The rooms remain beautiful, untouched, filled with light and memory, but the silence now has weight. It is the kind of silence that reminds you not of what is there, but of what is gone. Everything appears unchanged on the surface. The gardens still bloom with quiet defiance. Sunlight still spills across marble floors as if nothing has shifted. But small details tell another story. One rocking chair moves gently in the wind, while the other remains still. His boots rest near the door, polished but unworn. A folded newspaper waits where it always did, untouched by the hands that once reached for it. These are not just objects, they are echoes of a life shared. Each morning, she wakes before the sun rises, guided not by routine, but by memory. In the kitchen, she prepares 2 cups of tea out of instinct, pausing only when she remembers there is now just one. The quiet clink of a spoon becomes a rhythm of its own, a fragile reminder that love does not disappear. It lingers in the smallest gestures. Often, she walks to the small cedar chapel on the edge of the property, where the air holds the scent of wood and whispered prayers. There, she sits alone, humming songs meant for no audience, melodies shaped by love, loss, and everything in between. Yet even in solitude, her heart remains expansive. Without children of her own, she has poured her love outward, into family, into her goddaughter Miley Cyrus, and into millions of children through her imagination library, placing books into young hands across the world. She continues to write, to give, to create. Not driven by success, but by purpose. Because she no longer measures her life in achievements, but in the quiet impact of what she leaves behind. Time, however, leaves its mark. Her steps are slower, her voice softer, her breath more deliberate. Performances have been postponed, and those closest to her quietly ask for prayers. She calls this season her time of stillness, not as surrender, but as acceptance. Even now, she cannot remain idle. Between rest and reflection, she returns to her writing room, a space filled with guitars, photographs, and memories, and continues to create, not for the world, but for herself. In this quieter phase, her music has changed. It is no longer about performance. It feels more like prayer. Each note carries the weight of a life fully lived, each lyric a reflection of endurance, faith, and love that refuses to fade. Even as her body slows, something within her continues to move with unwavering rhythm, a rhythm shaped by resilience and grace. Her story has never been just about success. It is about survival, about choosing kindness over bitterness, faith over fear, and love over everything else. From the mountains of Tennessee to the grandest stages in the world, she has carried the same truth, that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the willingness to keep going despite it. And now, as she steps into this fragile, deeply human chapter, the world watches not with curiosity, but with gratitude. Because what she has given cannot be measured in numbers or awards. It lives in the hearts she has touched, in the songs that have healed, in the quiet courage she continues to embody. Because one day, the world may grow silent, but voices like hers do not disappear. They remain. Soft, steady, and eternal. Reminding us that some songs are not meant to end, only to echo.